All right, folks, I want to show you some wire techniques and tips for starting to get comfortable using our wire and our cutting and manipulating materials. So I've got a few things here in front of me that I'm going to use to try to help with this demo. One is a printout of those techniques and tips that are actually on Canvas. I'm going to kind of go through these one by one and point out some different ways to work. I also have a few different gauges of wire. So we should have a 20 gauge and an 18 gauge, or a 22 gauge and a 20 gauge. I can't quite remember, but our wires will probably be something similar to this weight. I also have some heavier weight wire of my own and some even lighter weight wire. So there are different kinds of wires out there. We're going to be using these kind of medium, easy to use gauge wires. If you have other wire at home and you want to incorporate it in, I'm definitely open to that. Just let me know. You should also have a pair of pliers. I've got a couple of different pairs of pliers. If you have other pliers in the house, you're welcome to use those. And you should have a pair of wire cutters as well. And again, if you have those sort of stronger ones than the ones that you got in your kit, you're welcome to use those too. So you have two things that you're going to be working on. One is a warm-up exercise, making a cube and a sphere. And that is really to get you comfortable with these different ways of thinking about wire. And then the next thing you're going to do is actually start on your wire sculpture of your selected animal. And you'll realize that as we go through these different techniques, and you especially start working on those basic forms, you will find it very helpful for moving over to making your animal sculpture. So let's go through this list. Number one, the first point for working with wire is to plan where you're going, right? What are you trying to make? You're not just taking a piece of wire and sort of hoping it works out. You probably have either an assignment or an idea, right? So I'm gonna take this wire. This should be very similar to the 20 gauge wire that you have in your packet. And I'll start with that. So plan where you're going. What does that mean? Let's say, for instance, you have to, as you do in our class, make a cube and a sphere. So I have some criteria that I've asked you to keep in mind. One is that I want your sphere and cube to both be at least 3 inches big. So maybe you want a ruler to help you kind of make sure that you're working with that. And then you probably want some paper in your sketchbook and a pencil to think with. Now, for a cube, I'm not talking about just a square, right? I'm talking about the 3-dimensional version of a square, which means something that has 6 sides, right? The thing is, when I make this out of wire, I don't have to make one of these squares to put them together. I can actually probably get away with making 1, 2, 3, 4, and that will become the cube. So you want to do a little bit of thinking before you start working on it. Maybe you want to make a template, especially with something like a cube, which has 6 even sides. You might want to actually measure out a square, and then you could take your wire and actually sort of try to follow along with that template. And I'll show you some ways to manipulate this wire in just a minute. So first step is really always to kind of take a pause and say, hey, what do I have to do? What is my plan? Same thing with that sphere, right? So the sphere isn't just a circle. A sphere, again, is that circle in 3-dimensional space. So maybe you're thinking about doing it sort of like a beach ball, or maybe you have an even more interesting way that you want to make it. Maybe you have intersecting circles going in different directions. Give yourself a little bit of time to sort of figure out where you want to go with it. Once you start working with the wire, you're going to realize that there are lots of little techniques that will help you figure out how to make your vision come true. So the second point is make a basic form and alter it from there. For instance, you can make a sphere, and that sphere can become a pear or a football or a cat body or a head. Anything can kind of be manipulated from these basic forms. And of course, that's why we're starting with these basic forms. Now let's get into actually manipulating with the wire itself. So the third point is ways to join or latch wires. Usually a good idea to create a hook or a U shape with pliers. So if I have to finish up this cube that I've already begun, there's a few things I'd like to show you here. I don't have the original template for this, so maybe I'll just give myself kind of a quick guide for the approximate size that I want that cube to be, pretty similar to that one up there. And another point that's really important is that don't be afraid to cut a little bit too much wire. You should have more than enough wire, so it won't be a big deal if you have a little bit left over. And one of the most frustrating things is trying to put something together when you don't have enough wire at the end. So here I am, I've got my piece of wire, I've got a little bit of a template that I need to use to complete my cube, and I have to figure out how to get a square shape out of this. Now the first thing I want to do is give myself a little bit of extra space down here, and then I want to make a fold. Now maybe making that fold isn't very easy. I like to use my thumb to just kind of make a little mark, and then this is where my pliers come in. You see, I can make a really nice sharp corner using my pliers. Same thing over here. My template is helping me understand how big I want my square to be, and I'm doing the same thing over here using my pliers in order to give myself a really nice sharp corner there. I'm going to keep using my template because I'm finding it so incredibly helpful, and I'm going to bring it across to over here. Now you can see really just how easily my square is forming. I'm doing a little bit of manipulation of the part of the wire that is in between the joints, right? And I can see that I want to bring these two pieces together over here. And again, I'm very happy that I have extra wire on here. If these were really short, this would be really difficult to twist together. So I'm just gonna go ahead and give that a little twist. I'll probably have to twist it again, but I'm gonna wait and see where exactly I want to cut this wire and exactly how tight I want it to be. I'm gonna actually put it right on here with the other three pieces that I already have put together. I'm gonna just kind of double check to see how this fits on here. I could attach this a number of different ways. You also could make your cube a number of different ways. Your cube doesn't have to be made the exact same way that I made it. Here's the beginning of another cube, and you can see this cube is made differently, right? This cube has 1, 2, 3, and I'm gonna add a fourth one right here. This cube right here has 1, 2, 3, 4, and I can add one here or here to complete the cube. So lots of different ways to make your cube. Try to work somewhat intuitively. You do want your cube to have even sides, but however you decide to put it together is really up to you. I think it makes sense to kind of see the way that your brain works. So I'm just sort of straightening this out a little bit, and I'm gonna see if I can just get this put all together. Now, because I already have wire here, I'm probably just gonna use my fingers to get this situated. But then my fingers aren't really strong enough, or I'm sort of trying to save my fingers, honestly, to really twist this around here, right? So I'm going to try to get my pliers involved to make my life a little bit easier. So grabbing the pliers over here, trying to bring it back. You can also use the pliers to kind of smush those pieces together so that they have a little bit more torque to kind of twist around. And I kind of go back and forth between my fingers and the pliers, depending on what kind of dexterity I need in order to make the piece come together. So obviously my cube is attached now almost completely. Kind of interesting to see how it could unfold. I probably will add a few more little pieces on here so that they can all be connected together. So what I could do is I could even just cut this little bit that I have off of here.
this is kind of a difficult amount of wire to work with. Let's see if I can do it. It can be a little bit hard to kind of get the, again, space you need to really make that work. So I'm going to pause on this. I'll come back to it to add a little bit more information to it in just a moment. The other assignment that I've asked you to do as a warm-up is a sphere. And again, a sphere can be made any number of different ways. Again, maybe you want to take one long piece of wire, as I have with this one, and sort of just wrap it around sort of beach ball style until you get what feels like a pretty good sphere. That's what this one is. That's why I have this extra wire on here. Or again, maybe you want to make some templates and put those together. So again, maybe I want to take a circle that I've drawn. If you're having difficulty drawing a circle, which can be pretty hard, take something with a nice, easy to trace round bottom. And I'm going to go ahead and cut a little bit of wire again, a little bit of extra wire, hopefully. Cut it with my wire cutters. And now I have to turn this into a circle, right? So I'm gonna try to get this pretty close to where I want it to be. If you're a real perfectionist, you could even, once you're happy with the size of the circle, you could measure it. So you could make 2 little marks, unfold it, take your ruler, get a sense of how long it is, and then you could have all your pieces be the same exact size. I tend to eyeball things a little bit more. So you can see here that I am able to kind of manipulate this into the shape that I want it to be. Maybe I want it to be more of an eye shape, maybe I want it to be oval, maybe I want it to be circular. We're working circular for the sphere, so I'm gonna stick with that. Now to go back to this point, ways to join or latch the wires, usually it's a good idea to create a hook or a U. So right now I've got my circle like this, and I could just try to twist and twist, but that's a little bit hard. So what I'm actually going to do is take the wire and make a little U hook here, right? See, a little bit of a hook. And I have something that I can hook this onto now. So I have a little bit more leverage in terms of being able to turn this into the shape that I want to turn it into. Again, I'm kind of trying to measure to that circle size. And what I'm gonna do here is the same thing. I gave it a little bit of a twist with my finger, but now I'm going back with my pliers, and I'm kind of squeezing that together. This technique of creating a hook or a latch, this is going to come in handy over and over and over. So remember when you are kind of struggling with wire and you're trying to twist it together and it just keeps moving and moving and moving and you can't get the leverage you're looking for, remember, give yourself a little leverage by making a hook, and that allows you to hook this onto here and to start to get that leverage that you need, right? Then you can start to twist from there. So super important basic point. So again, I could make several of these, and then I could create my sphere. Let's try to get a few more of these prepared. So now I have 3 evenly sized circles, and there's a million things I could do with this, right? Because I've asked you to make a sphere, you could again make the sphere like this, right? You could start to put these together and attach them at these different points with another piece of wire. Could take a little bit of time just to make sure that you're doing it evenly. Attach one there, attach one there, put another one on here, and get the third one on there. You could, again, create it just more with a single piece of wire, just kind of moving it around and wrapping it and going around. You also, with something like this, could create a cylinder. So now I could do something that is perhaps the length of a long body, right? If I had these, I could have another piece of wire that is coming through and connecting them, sort of like this form here, minus this part, of course. So you can see how just getting a little bit comfortable with putting those basic forms together can really start to allow you to do really interesting things with the wire. Again, I'll allow you to decide how you want to put those pieces together to create your sphere, and there could be even additional ways that you do this, and I'll get to those in just a moment. The other point that I make following that is ways to wrap wires together. You can twist 2 or more pieces of wire together. You can braid them. This makes the wire thicker, right? So it can actually make the wire a little bit stronger. It can also add textural variety or visual variety. So if we have something like this, which was going to turn into a watering pitcher for another project, you can see here that this wire is a little bit thinner, but when you start to twist that wire together, not only do you get visual variety there, but you get something that feels a lot stronger. So you're not limited by the weight of wire that we have. You can decide to get some extra wire together and start to twist to get stronger wire, or even again braid, or even twist multiple wires together, right? Double wire twist. So something important to think about. You can also, next point, twist the wire the way a fence wire is made, or a wire fence is made. So for instance, if you look at a chain link fence, you'll see the way these different pieces kind of come together. You can create something very similar. Let's say you had 2 wires. I'll go ahead and cut this wire in half just to demonstrate. And you wanted to have them come together, but you also wanted them to sort of have moments where they are apart, and there could be lots of reasons that you want to do this. Maybe it's, again, for a sort of surface variety, or you want to create something that is strong, but you can see through it. What you could start to do is, again, just sort of putting these wires together, creating that little kind of peephole for the wire fence, and I am starting to twist, right? Kind of bringing this over here and starting to twist. And this is a little bit of a lighter weight wire. I just had it cut, but you can see it's really easy to manipulate with your hands. If you needed to, you could always use your pliers for that. And you can kind of imagine that if you had a bunch of these put together, how next to each other they could start to form a really interesting pattern or kind of create an interesting surface across something, right? So again, another little technique to think about. There are other textural ways to use the wire. So you can weave the wire together, and you can create loops and twist them through. Again, this is all about that visual variety. You're trying to find a way to make sure that the body of whatever you are going to make as your sculpture isn't so plain, right? Isn't just like kind of a blank slate, but there are lots of ways to kind of address the surface of it. So if I were to imagine that I have this as the body of my animal, and maybe I have to sort of twist it or try different things to make it the way that I want it to look, maybe I'm starting to weave different materials through here to give that body a little bit more texture, or maybe I'm creating eyes on a head, right? You can start to imagine the way these things come together. The next point is let's see, think about the surface of the form, how cross contours or continuous contours might be illustrated. You can use pliers to create patterns that can contribute to the illusion of form. And that's a very similar concept. Again, imagine if I had this as the beginning structure for the body of my form. It would probably be a lot bigger, but I could really still manipulate it, right? Maybe the front of it is smaller, so I can start to squeeze it in smaller. Maybe the front of it is bigger, so I can kind of move that around. I can start to alter this form in pretty interesting ways, very simply, right? This went from a sphere to a pear pretty quickly, and perhaps I want this to have some kind of contour or shape that goes across it that starts to give it more definition. I could twist it around. I could actually give this some different texture. Maybe I am going back in with my pliers and trying some different zigzaggy stuff on here. Maybe I want to make a swirl. Maybe I want to make a cheetah pattern, right? All of this can start to be played with. So I could do that with bigger pieces and then start to put that across the surface of my form. Another point for a more complex shape, try using push pins to weave the wire around. You can put those push pins into the wall or into a piece of cardboard. So for instance, maybe I want to do something like make a paw for one of my animals. So maybe I'm making a dog claw, right? And I'm having trouble kind of making this form. What I can do is I can take a form like this, and depending on what kind of surface areas you have in your house, I could actually take push pins and put this into perhaps cardboard or the wall. And then what I would simply do is take some wire and start to wrap that wire around that form. Also recommend using an actual object to form things around, right? So maybe you need to do something that has a cylindrical form and you're having trouble with those circles. Maybe you take something that helps you actually start to get that form together. One thing that can be really important to realize is that usually the easiest time to use the wire is right when it comes off the spool, right? If I want something to have a smooth line to it, I'm not gonna take an old piece of wire that I have already done all this kind of pushing and prodding on, because that's never gonna really get smooth. When it comes right off of here, I can keep it relatively smooth. So maybe this is helpful for you if you need to kind of get a sense of how much wire you need, or maybe you want to build an armature around this and then you can slide it out. That can be really helpful. Another thing that can be kind of helpful is just using tape to hold things in place. You can kind of tape stuff to the tabletop if you're working on it and you're having trouble with it moving. Maybe you're back to your sphere and you can't quite get it where you want it to be. This is on a piece of paper, so it's probably going to move around a little bit, but I can kind of use some tape just to get it to stay in place. And if you're working with something really big, you can use a lot of tape, of course, right? But that can be really helpful. You can, again, also use it, maybe you need a joint to sort of stay together while you're working on something, but you're not ready to finalize it. You can do that, right? So don't be afraid to get in there and take your artist tape and let it help you out. This is kind of a really good trick, especially if you're working on something more complex. This tape can really, really, really be your friend. So maybe I have to kind of get this together. This lets me kind of hold it in place, hold this in place as I go back to finish this piece. Now, one little note about joints, some people don't mind them being a little bit wild. Always make sure that you are kind of closing them off at the end. You don't want these little sharp pieces sticking out. So if you are just, overlapping them in different kind of willy-nilly ways, okay, but make sure that you are kind of closing them so that no one gets cut. I've seen some people who really love making very neat, rounded joints. That can be really nice too. If you're a precise kind of person, you may decide that that method is better for you. And once it feels like it's tight, you can let it just kind of keep going around, and you can give it a little squeeze again with your pliers so that it doesn't move. Maybe you can get this last piece to go around too. And if you really want to, you can always trim it down with your wire cutters for perfection. It's really everyone has their own kind of way of working with this. So I'd finish this up, and I'd have my beautiful cube. A couple of last points, you know, if you are really into precision, or if symmetry is really important to the piece that you are working on, I recommend really using your ruler to help you get that figured out. So here's the beginning of a piece that is going to turn into a cone, have a nice little ovular bottom, and then these two pieces needed to be the same height so that they could reach together at the top of that cone, right? And so I measured in order to do that, got my ruler out, made sure that from here to here was the same as from here to here, about 7 inches, right? So again, you can see that as you start to accumulate all these different techniques together, you're putting them even all together to make something more interesting. Got my 2 U-hooks here. I can go in with my fingers to tighten this up, come back with my pliers to bring it together. All of these different techniques together are going to start to allow me to really think creatively about how I will make the form for my animal.